Welcome to Conversations with the Unseen. My name is Andy.
And my name is Laura. And in December 2019, we began an amazing and completely unexpected journey conversing with beings from the unseen world, which has totally transformed our lives.
And here we are, after hundreds and hundreds of hours of conversations, doing what our non-physical friends have been encouraging us to do, sharing their message with others who may be interested.
So let's dive in.
Hello, dear friends.
Hello, Mexicans. So today we have with us Ulrike, my dear, 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 dear friend Ulrike. And Ulrike is somebody who is a real catalyst and supporter and playmate for me, not just personally, but also in wizard school. And so I really love that she has chosen to say yes to the invitation to come and play with you and I on the podcast Mexicans.
Welcome, Ulrike.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm so curious what we'll talk about. And so thank you so much for inviting me. And I can't say how grateful I am for being part of the community, the Wizard School, everything, being able to learn from the Mexicans and practice with everyone together. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we were saying earlier, Ulrike, what did we do before the Mexicans? And I guess that's a real testament to just how much there is a contrast for us, like how much life has changed for us both.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it feels like it has accelerated everything and has kind of, I mean, like for me, the most valuable or one of the most valuable things I think that is coming out of this whole journey is to be brought back to my inner being and learning how to connect with that, learning to ask it everything, you know, and being led by the inner being rather than by the ego mind. And that has been incredibly healing for me so far. And I'm so curious kind of what that actually will do once that connection is even stronger. And I have and I have the ability to easily, use energy communication and things like that. Like yesterday, I was listening to something about trauma, and they were talking about plant-based medicine, and one of them talked about how the indigenous people actually, because he asked one of the shamans how they knew from those thousands of plants to pick those two and to boil them together for 8 hours or whatever. And the shaman said to him, well, the plants told me. And I thought, whoa, I would love to be able to get my information about anything through the energy. So yes, I'm very kind of curious, excited, and happy to be on this trip with you all.
I love that. It reminds me of when I make Andy poached eggs and he says, how long do they take? And I say, the eggs tell you. Anyway, so Mexicans, what would you like to explore and talk with us about today?
We are inspired by the concept of shamanic eggs. And perhaps this is an opportunity to build upon what you have been describing as your journeys, using our perspective to expand your own awareness and to create for yourselves a more conscious experience of being human. And we would say this is a choice, and it is a choice that is open to all. who wish to take it. And you both have made that choice. You are able to describe the difference in how you navigate the world of form, which can be challenging in so many ways. And this, of course, is intentional. It is no accident that there would be challenges as you come into form and experience the contrast from where you came from, the world of energy and oneness and love. As you step into the physical dimension and are aware of an environment that is completely opposite to what is true, limiting your awareness to the senses, and the senses being part of the illusion. And so we would say the journey that you describe is an energetic one. It is a journey of tuning in to that non-physical self, that non-physical essence of who you really are, the unique and perfectly imperfect expression of Great Spirit. And the journey of coming into form and remembering that that is who you are creates a very different experience of being in the world of form. And this is what you describe. And perhaps today's conversation can be an invitation to others to make that choice for themselves. And we wonder, before you made that choice, what was it that was preventing that from happening for you both? What was keeping you from aligning and living life aligned with who you really are?
I guess what for me, I can now see that the ego was in charge. The ego thought there was a problem because it didn't like what it was creating. And the ego thought it was its job to fix it. And that just kept me going round and round and round in endless circles where I was utterly bewitched and hypnotized by the world of effects, by the senses, what the senses were showing me.
And so a misunderstanding.
Yes.
I think I was like Laura, I was so over-identified with my ego and all the thoughts that the ego produced that, and I didn't realize that there was such a thing as an inner being. And I remember listening to other people talking about it and thinking, oh, that would be nice. I would love to have an inner being. I don't know whether I do. And took me probably a year or two of just kind of going in and out of, or maybe even longer. I think this is because I always had a yearning. So I think there was always a yearning to find something like this, but I didn't quite know how to get there. So because it came from the ego, right? So, or the ego was in charge. I don't know, maybe it interfered like that. so there was always this yearning. So I would be reading about things and listening to things, but I didn't really believe that that was true for me. And so that took a couple of years. And then I kind of thought, okay, I probably have an inner being, but my ego decided, well, but if it's your inner being, that can't be a good inner being. So we better get somebody else's inner being instead, because of one of the programs that the ego was carrying quite strongly was this idea of not being good enough, right? So obviously then from the ego's perspective, the inner being can't be good enough either. So that's kind of funny now. So that took me a while to get over, but I was then slowly on that path. And but I think, yeah, for me, it was mainly that kind of misunderstanding and thinking I am the ego.
And it's such a painful misunderstanding.
Yes.
Because I don't know about you, for Ulrike, but for me, it was like that sense of like hopelessness, powerlessness, struggle, effort. I'm doing it wrong. I need to try harder. What's wrong with me? Why can other people do it? And it's like, and it's not working for me. And so it didn't really create like a life of ease and joy and lightness.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the same for me. And I think, I guess my ego is relatively capable, so I still managed to kind of be successful, if you want to call it, but it kind of came at a really high price of just being so exhausted and feeling so alone in it all, and just pushing, and then kind of also falling like in a sense of hopelessness, and then feeling also like a fraud, because of my work, working with people and not being able to sleep and all this kind of stuff that kind of came with living from the ego mind. And yeah, and it is a really, really painful existence to be identified with it, because it can be good, but it's never really good, right? And it's never really free. It's okay, right? But who wants to live a life that is okay? I mean, that didn't inspire me particularly. And then also looking to experts, hoping that they could help me, like learning their system, and then every single time being disappointed because it didn't work. And then also another part of me saying, oh, F this.
It's okay to say fuck here.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, so fuck this, I'm not doing this. This sounds stupid, So, and that obviously didn't leave the ego in a good place either.
Wow.
And many will relate to these words, having the yearning, feeling that life is physically and materially acceptable. For many it is not, of course. For many, they have what they would term success, and yet they may not feel fulfilled. They may not feel successful. And we would say the reason for that is these external physical factors are unable to bring that sense of fulfillment. It is an energy, it is an alignment that brings these feelings and this sense of being who you really are in the world of form, and being free and feeling free to express that. And so many will, we feel sure, resonate with these words, these descriptions. And so if those listening are hearing these descriptions, how to proceed? How would one move from a position of not feeling fulfilled by the world of form and feeling perhaps frustrated, to feeling more peaceful, What has been your experience?
I think for me, it was kind of practicing to connect with the inner being, and just kind of being introduced to the idea that I was identified with the ego or led by the ego, and then to keep practicing. Okay, so that's one perspective. What's the other perspective? And the ego did not initially do this quite willingly always, but over time it has become easier and easier. So for me, it would be practicing it, finding a way of having something in your life that anchors it in, because the hardest bit for me was like I kept forgetting, because it's so automatic to keep going to the ego, and because it's so fast, right? We get these thoughts in our head and we're used to them, so we go with them. So it was kind of creating something. For me, it was meditation. I like meditation, so I would kind of start doing that in the meditation. And then after a while, I added other things just to ask the inner being, even though, I guess in the meditation, what I kept practicing was to notice how the inner being speaks to me. So I had to kind of familiarize myself with how I feel it in my body when the inner being kind of creates the energy of yes or no. And I just kind of familiarized myself for a long time with that. And then slowly I would start asking kind of questions about minor decisions, like I don't remember, like stuff that doesn't matter, like for some people that may be food, for others it may not be. It could be about, do I want to exercise or not, like things that don't have much consequences, many consequences either way. And so then for me it was that slow process of just kind of remembering it more, doing it more. And then also, because at the beginning I could only ask yes or no questions, and now I kind of feel much more comfortable with the idea of asking open questions. And I experience it then as having an insight all of a sudden. So, and through that, I guess what works for me is also very much is kind of to, whenever the ego gets triggered and it kind of gets, and I experience negative, so-called negative feelings, I would sit down with my ego, try and find out what is bothering it. So in that moment, I'm already not identified with it any longer, but I kind of look at it as a different part of me. And then I would kind of, because of my training, I'm a psychologist, right? So I'm always curious about the belief system. So I would want to know from my ego, kind of to try and know what it believes. But then I would just sit there with it and kind of feel the feeling and be compassionate with the ego. And that really works for me. It kind of calms the ego down. And then I can have a conversation with my inner being without the interference of the ego. And that's now where I then get the inner being's perspective. And to me, this has become such a powerful way of being, because it just shifts something in, like this energy or the program immediately, or usually it does. And it feels so liberating and exciting. So actually now I have, and that's a big deal for me, because it wasn't like that for a long time. Now I welcome it in when the ego is in trouble, so because I know now that it will liberate me more, and it's an opportunity. So, and that has been a massive shift in my quality of life, as well as in like, and how calm I feel and peaceful I feel in my life, so, which is wonderful.
The journey continues, and it may be worth explaining from our perspective how we interpret the terminology that you use. In using the word ego, many listening may have an interpretation of the word that is different from ours. And we would say the word ego is representing the human self, the human perspective, and is based on a very limited understanding of what is occurring in any given moment, limited by the senses that provide information to the human mind that is a fraction of what is occurring outside of its awareness. The inner being is an expression of your non-physical self, who you are beyond form. And this is, of course, beyond what it is possible for the human self to understand. It is who you are as an expression of Great Spirit, eternal and infinite.
I really liked what you said, Ulrike, about practice. What I love about this is the simplicity. Like fundamentally, there's a perspective that will come from the ego or a perspective that will come from the inner being. And our job is to discern which is the inner being and which is the ego. And for me, it's like you said, it's that practice, it's the remembering, and it almost feels like the automatic default reaction is to look to the outside, and what we've been training the ego mind to do is to begin to look inside. Like, who am I being to create this as my experience? And now that this is here, how do I choose to respond? And I loved what you said about beginning to welcome things in more, because there are things that used to challenge me that I would just I can knock off at the pass. And in fact, sometimes the chatter of the ego can seem quite funny. There's still things that for sure that catch me, and I think that this is a journey. It's not like a one-time thing. It's something that it's a moment-to-moment practice. And I guess it's like if we were to stop all of our stop the ways that we're practicing, it would be easy to then just be like, oh wow, I ended up back aligned with the ego again, because it feels like we're looking to shift the dominant energy from being aligned with the ego to being aligned with the inner being. And that feels easier. We were talking recently about how it can be really, what can be a space of real ease for one person is a space of impossible goddamn challenge for another. Because we all come in with our own programs.
We would say that discerning the difference between the human perspective and the inner being's perspective is the more straightforward part of the practice. The human perspective can be identified by its energy and its alignment with certain perspectives, usually based on fear or some derivative of fear, judgment, anger, worry, and also the belief in separation. And this is part of the illusion that the inner being is experiencing in the world of contrast, that where it has come from and still exists in the non-physical, there is no separation. And in this experience of being human, it seems like there is a separate I and others. And we often refer to these others as apparent others, because this is how the experience seems. It does seem like there are these others, when in fact, energetically, they are all expressions of the one. And so in many ways, these apparent others are you as you look around. And of course, the illusion is something else. The more challenging part of the practice is perhaps to align with the inner being's perspective, which is always loving and non-judgmental, and sees the oneness, experiences the oneness. And this simple truth, very profound truth, is the answer to what the human self may call problems, challenges, difficulties. To align with this perspective of love and oneness, and to allow the present moment to be as it is, trusting the perfection in the present moment.
Yeah, I love that idea of trusting of accepting and trusting the present moment. And when you started talking about the difference between the ego and the inner being, it kind of reminded me of one of the challenges that I had at the beginning, that my ego really enjoyed being angry and didn't see a point in not being angry because it kind of felt quite justified and energized, I guess, by some things. And it took me a while to realize that it's not serving me. And so for a long time, I would let my alignment be undermined by that, because I would then realign with the ego instead of the inner being. And I imagine that quite a few people have egos that maybe also don't see the point in feeling good all the time because something horrible is happening in the world. So you should feel angry, right? Because of that separation that the ego feels, then it feels like it's belonging to other people, like what we talked about yesterday, right? And it's a bit of a learning and a journey for the ego as well, to realize that doesn't really help, and that it is actually better. Because I think my ego assumed that it's more powerful when it's angry, and obviously anger feels better than fear, but it's still not powerful, really. It's kind of this impotent power, I guess. And like impotent rage that kind of feels powerful but doesn't get you anywhere. And it took this ego a while to kind of get on board with the idea of coming from love. And now I can see for myself, this is the most powerful way I can be, because I have peace and I'm grounded, and I can come from my inner being. I can come from that place in me that actually gives me true power. And being able to accept what's happening in the moment, that certainly was not easy for me at all. And I remember in my early 20s, somebody gave me the book Loving What Is by Byron Katie, and I just looked at the title and thought, I just threw it away. I threw it into my shelf, but I never looked at it for another 20 years. And it took me a really long time to appreciate acceptance, because I also misunderstood it from the ego's perspective completely. It seemed like a condoning and again being powerless, right? And
I love that.
How beautiful it feels once you can accept the moment and realize it's just the energy that needs to shift.
I love that, the simplicity. I too had the same reaction with Byron Katie or BK. Is like, well, what 4 questions are you kidding me on? And yet they're so powerful. And I guess it reminds me of just the ego always thinks it's much more complicated than it actually is. I'm thinking about the example you had recently of flow and love to the guy, the caretaker guy, when he was pissed at the children. And actually, it's like what you were able to create, what showed up by you not being angry, but by you flowing love to him and just being, it is what it is, was probably for some, like they would say, that's a miracle. Because like the ego would be like, you should tell him, that's unacceptable, don't take that. It's like, what, you're going to allow him to speak to your children like that? What, are you some kind of pushover? And it's there with all this stuff. And you were so, because, the Mexicans were saying about discerning and aligning. And I was thinking, yeah, discerning's really easy. We feel like shit. It's like aligning is the journey, like coming from that alignment. But it was so inspiring listening to you tell that story. I wonder if you would be willing to share it.
Of course. Yes, I am willing. So I had my children were playing in the communal garden of where we live, and we have this person who is the manager for the whole street, for all the flats in the street, and he is, I would normally describe him as quite grumpy, and we have in our not so kind days called him the troll, because he has his office in the basement that we use and have to go through to go into the garden. And so the kids were in the garden playing football, but didn't shoot any windows or anything like that. They were just doing training and were quiet. I couldn't hear them, normally hear everything in the garden, but he went out and complained that they were kicking the balls too loudly and blah, blah. And it was in the late afternoon, so nobody was, not working hours or anything like that. And so my initial response, the ego did get angry, but then I thought, you know what, actually it's not worth it. I don't want to lose my well-being over someone that is just part of my street, so why should I? And I wanted to try something different. So I decided to flow love, and the ego had a bit of trouble with it at first. So what helped me then was the ego was more on board when I thought, okay, then we'll send it to his inner being. So the ego could deal with that. He didn't want to send it to his ego. And then over time it became easier. And actually 4 or 5 days later, when the kids went back into the garden and my husband accompanied them, he wanted to talk to him. And the guy came immediately to him and said, oh, I'm so sorry. I had a really bad day. People were complaining all day about noise. Your kids were not too noisy. I'm really sorry. It's all fine. And then he even went outside and later apologized to the children, which that definitely was a bit of a miracle. And so yeah, it felt like such a cool creation. And actually since then I've been flowing him love every day, and I've stopped calling him the troll, just call him by his first name in my mind, which so it definitely has kind of created more peace and freedom in myself, and it seems to work, right?
So inspiring.
And this would be an example of choosing the path of peace, which is alignment with the inner being, the more loving response, rather than the human self that sees itself as in competition with others and needing to be ahead in some way.
It begins to feel that we're just tapping into a different reality. And I'm always reminded of, like, Mexicans, you talk about, you do it to the extent that you do it, because there's a never ending journey of discovery around that. And yeah, competition for me has been a big one for this ego. Since I've been really small. And of course, in the back of competition, if you think you're not winning, then this ego has gone to being very critical and judgmental. When actually what occurs to me is an example from some years ago where Andy was on the phone to me. He was really excited, telling me about all this great client stuff that he had just created that day and how much the client was paying him to hang out with them. And I'd had a shitty day, and it's like, I remember being really green cheese. And I remember then the ego's judgment of feeling bad for feeling jealous. Thankfully, it was the phone, he didn't notice. And I remember like going home that night and just having this thought, if he can do it, I can do that too. And that actually really served me, because I really did create something way beyond what I had experienced to that point. And so I guess for me, and I don't know what it's like for you, Ulrike, you've touched on this. When something comes up from the ego's perspective, which, let's face it, is often, it's an invitation to remember, oh, I'm not being aligned with my power here. I now see it as more of the ego being the personal trainer, the ego inviting me to remember how powerful I really am, and to come from that perspective. Because something you said many times, Mexicans, that has really pissed me off, pissed this ego off big time, is the ego only has the power that you give it. Which, when you're completely caught in something, it does not feel like that. And if you had bodies, there would have been times where I'd wanted to thump you, because that's not how it feels, right? I can see Ulrike laughing.
And what is your understanding now of that concept?
The ego has as much power as you give it. And I can still feel like there is identification. Like, so when I'm caught in something, there's still an identification where I can still feel the ego reacting to that. But the more I practice, the more I'm seeing that, oh wow, I am really powerful, pretending to be weak, pretending that this program is in charge of me, pretending that this program is controlling me, and even seeing myself as being powerful but having forgotten in the moment feels better than I'm doomed and hopeless, and it's like this is never going to change. So that feels like it's on the path, right? It's a tiny step in the direction that I wish to travel in.
And so to give the ego power is to believe and align with its perspective. And the ego is powerless if you refuse to do this. If you are aligned with the inner being and experience the world of form from that perspective of knowing that you are everything, that you are the universe, that you are love, that you are infinite and therefore infinitely powerful, the ego has no ability to challenge that. That is to withdraw the power from the human self, the human perspective.
And something that you shared with me that was so helpful, Mexicans, was that when something keeps coming up in an area, the ego's actually showing you that you're not aligned with who you really are in that area. And so for instance, for me around alcohol, that would have been an area where I had like more alignment with the ego. If one drink felt good, then 10 drinks would feel better. And what I can now really see is that if there is a thought that comes into the awareness, oh, let's have a glass of wine, now I will just align with the inner being. And it's yes or no. And for the vast majority of the time, the ego just accepts the response from the inner being. it doesn't push back, it doesn't question. And that feels so much freer than feeling that you're at the mercy of this persistent thought that just says, have it, have it, have it, have it, have it. And then you have it and it says, can't believe you had it.
And what you are describing there is partnership between these two perspectives, the human perspective and the infinite perspective, the non-physical perspective, where there is agreement and trust that the inner being will be the decision maker, it will be the leader, and therefore is saving the ego from itself, from its lack of self-control.
I think what kind of surprises me is how much the ego now loves being able to ask the inner being and how relieved it feels. And for me, I mean, like one of the areas in my life where that are an edge that for me is kind of to say no to people, or to make a decision that is purely based on what I want, because I guess I grew up wanting to please people from that. I mean, my ego likes that, right? It feels safe like that. And so anytime when I'm making a decision and I can feel the confusion that I kind of traditionally would feel when I'm aligned with the ego, I kind of remember now, oh, you can ask the inner being. And even the ego is like, oh, yay, yeah, we can ask the inner being. Thank God it's not up to me. And it's such a relief. And then the ego doesn't kick off the normal kind of, you should do this, no, you shouldn't, and blah, blah, you don't want to, but you should, and yada, yada, the back and forth. It just calms down and dies down, and I then can just go with what the inner being considers to be the right choice in that moment. And that feels like such a liberation and so much more freedom. And I guess, for me, the ego, what it always shows me is where I don't have freedom. The freedom is one of the big ones that I crave, and where the ego kind of shows me when I'm out of alignment with that.
And by showing you, you have greater freedom to choose where you align yourself. And the ego would have programs running around choosing for yourself, being seen by others as unacceptable, selfish, self-centered. And yet it is the wisest choice to make in any situation, to be aligned with your own truth and to follow that, rather than try to please others by meeting their expectations or trying to.
Actually, thinking about it now, it reminds me that a couple of years ago, again, Byron Katie, she talks a lot about how she just checks in with herself, right? And so she either says yes to herself or yes to the other person, if her inner being, I guess, also says yes to the other person. And I remember how alien that was to me and how I couldn't understand. I thought, what? How does that work? Just kind of, how can that alleviate anything? And it was so frustrating to me for a long time. And I guess why I wanted to say it now is because having practiced aligning with the inner being instead has actually given me that kind of freedom and the ease around that. And now it seems so normal and natural to do that. And so if I can do that, I'm just telling, that's what I'm saying. That means that everybody else can feel that in them too, because that was like a complete beyond and something that I did not think is a possibility at all. And it was just the ego, right, that couldn't imagine it. That's it. And it is possible to align with that and to find your own voice like that, and then kind of connect with the inner being like that.
And it almost brings us like full circle back to the idea of like the ego that goes round and round and round and round in circles. And, it weighs up the pros and it weighs up the cons, and there's the analysis and the evaluation and the speculation and the creativity around all its fantasy stories. And there's something about to just align with the inner being, cuts through all of that. And it's just, there's such a beautiful simplicity. I know that Andy and I have had conversations that perhaps would take some people, I don't know, much longer, but our conversation would go along the lines of, okay, what's the question? Let's both ask the inner being. And if we come back and we get alignment, it's like, job done, move on.
And there you are describing freedom, the freedom to choose, the freedom to align with what is true for you, and what the energy is telling you, how the energy is guiding you in that moment.
Mexicans, I have loved this conversation. It's been so wonderful having Ulrike's presence and energy be part of this co-creation. And I wonder, as we come to a close, if there's any final words that you have for us.
We acknowledge you both for coming together to have this conversation, to be shared with others. It is our intention to be of service to others. And as with many, if not all, aspects of this journey, there is more to understand. And this has, we hope, served as an invitation to explore for those listening.
I love you, Mexicans.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, because I really enjoyed just reflecting on it and being asked these questions. And it does give me a sense of being at the beginning of the journey, but it already feels like, wow, it's so exciting. And if it's already that good at the beginning, how cool can it be, being on that journey even more. So thank you very, very much.
Probably beyond your wildest dreams.
Good.
Until next time.
Thank you.
Until next time.
You've been listening to Conversations with the Unseen.
If you'd like to know when there's a new conversation available, then remember to subscribe and also to share it with others.
If you'd like to have a written transcript of each conversation, then you'll find this on the website conversationswiththeunseen.com.
And if you have a question you'd like us to ask on your behalf, or if you would like to join the mailing list, then you can also do that on the website conversationswiththeunseen.com.
Until next time.